So good morning. I want to start today by looking at a couple of different charts. And the reason is that we have a very good example today of different types of ranges and trends. And of course, that's really how you need to start every day, is determining whether or not you are in a range or in a trend or close to transitioning from one to the other. Right now we're looking at crude oil, and it should be very obvious looking at the last really couple of days here that we're stuck in a very large range. Even yesterday's very powerful move up and then down after the crude oil inventory reports really just kept us inside of a range from the prior day and the low. So as you can see, I marked off transition points from the prior high, from the prior low, and we traded up to those transition points, and then we traded down to the prior transition points. So really the definition of a range. As we look at what's going on today, we're basically inside of that as well. Now, you could get a little creative and look at this as maybe a couple of chart patterns or things like that. So for example, if I drag a line over here, we could say that we might have some sort of a trend line that comes across some of these highs and lows. Even if we shrink this one up a little bit and just put it here, you could say that we had a running range that just had a breakout and a retest. But overall, we're still in a larger range. So we need to be aware of that in terms of where the boundaries of any move might be. So for example, if you were to have traded a breakout here or the pullback and traded this up, you would know that you have obviously the high right in front of you, as well as a high here and a high here that you needed to be aware of. And what that does is it puts you in the mindset of what your risk to reward is, right? We're always looking for what we would call a roadblock, something in front of us. And so very easy to establish over the last couple of days that we've been in a range on this. When we bring that into what are we doing for the day, it changes, right? So today for the session, I'm just going to clean that up a little bit. We have an open somewhere around here. We go up and we make a high in the overnight. Then London, we're really in a range. Then we break down from the range. You can see we traded into this little area of consolidation. So we broke down out of a range. Okay, so if we had been looking at this, whatever this is, at 3 o'clock in the morning, we might have been more focused on this, where we have a range, and then here is the breakdown, right? So we could be looking at the various transitions here and here and saying, okay, well, when we broke down through this transition, we started trending down for the overall range here, but we'd have to be aware of what's down below, right? We would probably be shooting for the low down here. We could maybe look at this as a area of consolidation at the close, but it wouldn't be very likely. I mean, I think if I were trading this, I'd be shooting for the low here. And so the minute that we transitioned out of a range, I would be thinking trend at least down to yesterday's low. But that wasn't the case, and we ended up holding here, right? And we could even check this for, let's just take a look and see what happened. Did we hit a CWAP here? Oh, very close, right? That's a questionable fill. Right, but that would have been, let's just assume for the purpose of discussion that you got filled at 99, which I doubt it. You would have had a stop that would have come in right at the other side of the transition, so this would have made sense. So 99 to 05, that's 6 ticks. That means we would have had to get 12 out of this from 99, and we traded all the way down to 79. So there was much more than a 2-to-1 return had that actually been filled. I mean, who knows if it would have? I doubt it. But you can see that once the range is broken, we start looking at a trend. Okay, and then we have to start now putting the context together for the day beyond that, right? So we have some highs up here. And I apologize for using the cursor or the crosshair. I know it makes it very difficult to follow on a video because there's sort of lines everywhere. But for the sake of doing this quickly so that we can start trading, I'm going to just knock it out. So we have these highs from the range. We have these lows that we've now broken, right? And then as we trade down, let's assume that we're looking at this at 5 a.m. Well, now we have a range, right? We have maybe the continuation of a trend down, but overall we've lifted up, right? So we know that, and even in simple terms, we've now made a higher high than the last little high here. So that would indicate that we're going to be making higher lows, so maybe that this is turning around. So that means that now we have a range. If I came in right here, and this is when I started looking at the chart, I could say, well, we did have a trend breakdown through a range, but now we've established a potential low of a range. So I could be looking at this transition here, and it looks like we almost came down to it. We missed it by just a couple of ticks here. I guess we could probably improve this just a little bit and see if we still didn't get back to the point of control, but you can see that that's sort of the low that we worked off of, right? So now trading back, if we were here, we wouldn't have gotten any sort of long here, but we would have to be thinking, well, where is this likely to go to if we're moving up? Well, it's likely to go to the other side of the range, and that puts us right at 53.18, and sure enough, we trade up to 53.18. Now, if you were looking at this as a short opportunity here at 7:15, you would have likely been in front of it by a tick, so 53.17, right, with a stop up here. And obviously, we got more than 2-to-1 out of that. Where did we hold when we came back down? Well, we didn't come all the way down to the low, right? We didn't in this example, but we can start tracking back and thinking about where it would have made sense that we might have found some support. And so here we have the resistance that we trade down to. We trade back up, we find resistance, and then we trade down, and then this breaks, right? So there's a breakout out of resistance. So it makes sense that we might find some support here. It's not something that we would have been able to zero in on. And please understand that. Not everything that you do in trading is about finding a trade. It's about making sense of what's on the chart. Because the minute that you're actually available to make sense of something, you have put yourself in the highest category of trader. The reason is that most people who try to trade, they're just going to follow an indicator. They have absolutely no idea why the market may stop at any given price or what might hold. They have no way to predict price at all. And your job is to look at the chart and make sense of it, no matter where it goes, because you want to be able to have that knowledge at your fingertips for the next time it happens. Right? So you might look at this the next time you see something like this and say, well, I think it should trade all the way down to the low, but I could understand if we have a roadblock here. Right, so hitting something like this and lifting back up may give you enough pause to adjust your stop, to adjust your targets, maybe to take a little bit of profit. Either way, it puts you in a category of trader that most novice retail traders are just never going to get there. Right, they're just never going to be able to do it. So with that, we end up trading back up. Where do we trade back up to? Same high, but this time we break out, and then we find support there, right? So these are all range-based trades once we establish a range, and then here, breaking out of the range, we would say, well, maybe there's an uptrend that's going to start, right? So by pulling back into the transition here, maybe we're going to have an uptrend. And now, the way that this chart looks right now for the current session is that we're potentially in an uptrend. Okay, so we would start using trend-based tools again. And the only thing we'd need to put into consideration is where might we be holding the uptrend. So we have a transition here and we have a transition here. So we're obviously at that one right now and potentially moving up to the next here. And then we can go deeper into the range up to here, right? So it's all perspective of, are we currently in a trend or a range given the nearby boundaries, the last day or so. Right? Now contrast that to what's going on in the ES. This is the last couple of days in the ES. We've basically had a move up since 10:30 in the morning on the 23rd. We've gone more or less straight up. So the question is, are we in a swing or are we in a range? Well, it looks, or trend or range. It looks to me as though we're in a trend, right? So the first thing that we want to do is just look at this. Now this is going to be a massive swing, particularly for the ES, and it's very unlikely that we're going to trade, all the way back down to the low today, or even maybe back to a midpoint. But the first thing that we want to do when we have that is get a swing up so we know where the volume weighted average price is, right? Because if this turns into a move lower, it's very likely that we have what's called a mean reversion. We're going to trade back to the average, right? And that is falling right now down at 22.77. So that gives us a larger target to shoot for. And it also puts things in perspective. Have we even crossed the CWAP since any of this has happened? No. So look how tight the CWAP was all along that first part of the move. And then it broke away, and we haven't even come back to it. It's not practical for us to try and take a trade off of 2284 with a stop at 2276, right? It's just not practical at all. So we're not looking at this as a trade off of a CWAP. We're trying to put it in perspective for what the current swing or trend looks like. The other thing we can do is start to move this to other points where we may see more clarity from the actual trading range. So here what I've done is moved it over to, this isn't quite the start of the next session. Let's move it over just a little bit more. This would be yesterday's session, okay? So from yesterday's session low, we hit the CWAP, we hit the CWAP. I mean, beautiful stuff, right? For a full trending day, there are a couple of times in here where we actually hit the CWAP, and notice we're on it right now, okay? So for even the last 2 days, we have an upswing or a trend. So we should be thinking, okay, well, what happens in a trend? In a trend, we either have a trend continuation or we revert back to the mean. And in this case, the mean for the last couple of days is not very far away. But still, this is way too big of a spread to take for an order, right? I mean, we're not going to risk 3.5 points, right? I mean, I'm not going to risk 3.5 points. So now it becomes a point where we're looking at this and saying, okay, is this uptrend still valid for today? And so far, we haven't crossed either one of the VWAPs, so we need to be aware that in the bigger picture, we're in an uptrend. But just like anything else, I'm going to make this not active so there's not so much background there. Just like in crude, we now need to put it in perspective of from this session, right? What's happened in this session? So it looks like the market opened here yesterday afternoon, made a high, and now we're right back at what? The low of the session, right? So let's get a decision point on here. I'm going to bring that to the front so we can really see it. Okay, and that's essentially what we've just traded into. Even though we're on the CWAP and there's a VWAP down below, you can see the bottom of the range, and we can see the top of the range here. Right, so we're technically in a range for the session. It looks like we could break down. So I want to think about something. If we break down through this low, for the session, we're in a downtrend. And where might that downtrend go to? Well, the first thought of mine would be to the VWAP here. And additionally, it may be to the larger VWAP that we were just looking at, because we know that we've had a 2-day uptrend. So let's bring this back, put it down on the low. Let's simplify this so it doesn't clutter up our chart so much. The only thing I want to show, let's get all this stuff off of here, is the volume weighted average price. So I'm going to turn the profile off so that it doesn't show too much junk. And now I know the VWAP for this entire swing up. So if this turns into a breakdown, I'm going to have a target that potentially, by the time we get new volume in the market, this might come up to 80, and that would give me a hell of a nice swing down. So for this particular chart, rather than being focused on just the uptrend, turn this off, just the uptrend, I know that for the session, I'm in a range right now. We could be lifting back up off of this range and trading all the way up. But if we break down through this range, I might be thinking about a short. So I want to put my swing profile for this up here. And notice we're holding the point of control, we're holding the CWAP, we're below the VWAP. So if this range doesn't hold, we might go from an uptrend to a downtrend. And again, it's all perspective, right? In the bigger picture, we're in a massive upswing, but we don't have any way to join it with our trend following tools without a massive entry, right? So we have to find a subset of that. So that might be, we could have traded off of this to go long and then hope that it breaks out of the top. When it breaks out of the top, or if it breaks out of the top, if we were to trade up, could we put our swing profile here and get into a VWAP trade up above? Could we use this as a transition to trade off of to go long up above it? Or are we going to be in a short for the day for the day session to revert to the mean of the larger trend. Right? So it's just a different perspective. On crude, we very much were in a range once we broke out of this and created a new range, and then now we've broken out here. Looks very much like we should be tracking some sort of swing, right? So we're going to grab it from here and look and see. We went pretty deep into all of this, so it doesn't look like we've been holding much of a swing. Let's go down to the low. A little bit, but this is very difficult, right? So it looks to me more like there is a transition here, and we know that we're up against a lot of awkward highs here. We're right on it right now. So breaking out of this, then we've got to start looking at the higher one here. So crude looks a bit messy because we're in a very large range. Now let's contrast that with the euro. So in the euro, looking at yesterday, we created a range yesterday, so high to low. Right? The open of this would have been about right here. We traded up to the high. Let's just put a very quick decision point across this high. See how we did. So we traded up into the volume here. Not all the way up to the top, but up into the volume. Then we broke down. We traded into the lows. Right? Then we broke down from the lows. So we are very much in a downtrend compared to yesterday for the euro. So we might start by just doing the exact same thing. Let's go from the high down, and let's take a look at where we crossed the CWAP, crossed the CWAP, crossed the CWAP, and this would have been after. This would have been the most actionable time because this is after we broke down through the range, right? And then now we've been breaking away from the CWAP. So it's very unlikely that we're going to find a trade that way. Let's just double check that we're not up against some other lows. We've got a spread of about, well, we've got a pretty nice spread there down to the next set of lows. So the trend may be continuing. But that's three different markets, and it's just a very quick, how do I put it in perspective? Where are we compared to yesterday? Where are we compared to today? And for the beginning of today, we were basically in a range, right? And then we broke down through the range, and you can see the swing activity or the trend activity going down, and we still appear to be breaking down lower. So I hope this makes sense for how to begin your day and put it in perspective, because your tool set's very simple. You can make this really, really complex. You can say, well, I'm going to look at the print, and I'm going to try and dig into all of this stuff, and I'm going to try and put a profile on every single high and low. But if you don't start with a base perspective, you're just making it far too complicated.